listening to the Fantasy Takeaway Podcast with Murphy Hamilton and Joe Pollock. Proud member of the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast Network. Subscribe, listen, take home the title.
What's up, Takeaway Nation? Welcome back to yet another fun-filled episode. This is part 2 of our year in review. Last week, we did a collaboration with the RotoBros podcast for quarterbacks and tight ends. This week, we got Chris McConnell on to continue that with running backs and wide receivers. Chris, happy to be doing the show with you again, man. We love these.
Yeah, good evening, fellas. It's great to be here. Thanks for allowing me to join you guys. I'm pumped. Running backs and wide receivers move the needle more than any other position. That's what everybody wants to talk about come fantasy. Quarterbacks and tight ends, that was a fun show last week. But this is where the bread is buttered. This is the show. This is the part of the show where everybody wants to hear it because running backs and wide receivers, like I said, everybody wants to talk about those two positions.
All right, well, let's dive in. First, you want to talk about some coaching hires?
Let's do it.
I'm down. Let's do it.
All right. Joe, I'm so excited this drop is back. I don't know why. It's the silliest drop, but I love coaching carousel.
It's stupid, but it's funny.
Oh, yeah. All right, let's talk about some head coaching hires. I'm just going to list them all real quick, and then we'll dive into them. The Cowboys have hired Mike McCarthy, former Packers head coach. The Panthers have hired Matt Rule, the former Baylor head coach. The Giants have hired Joe Judge, the special teams coach for the Patriots. And the Browns are the only team now without a head coach opening. Joe, where do you want to start on these?
I want to start with Joe Judge, and I've got some crazy stats here. Why do people keep hiring Patriots assistant coaches? Like, I get it. The Patriots have been good for a very long time, but look at the cumulative record. I went down and I sat down and I looked at all of the coaches that had gotten a head coaching job after being a Bill Belichick assistant. They've coached 463 games. They have 191 wins and 271 losses with one tie. That's a 414 winning percentage. Bill O'Brien's the only one that's been to the playoffs more than once, and he only has 2 wins. One of them's this year, and I would be down to almost guarantee that he's getting another loss this week.
And honestly, Bill O'Brien has moments where you scratch your head and you're like, why is he still a head coach? Like,
more than a few.
It feels like he's lucking his way through it.
He's terrible.
It's terrible.
He's absolutely horrible. And to me, like I went on record last week over the weekend, and I said, win or lose, it is time for Bill O'Brien to be fired because the performance, had they been playing anybody else in the playoffs except the Bills, I think they probably would have lost that game. Okay, maybe not the Eagles without Carson Wentz, but still, there's just no. The offense is just lifeless to me. Like if it wasn't for Deshaun Watson, the offense would be the most boring offense in the entire league.
I just want to compare this real quick to what the gold standard for coaching is. Like, if you are on a coaching tree of a current NFL head coach, you want it to be Andy Reid. Andy Reid coaches are 382 and 352 with 2 ties. That's a 520 winning percentage. They've played 36 playoff games. Like, listen to this tree. Like, Brad Childress, Leslie Frazier, John Harbaugh, Sean McDermott, Matt Nagy, Doug Peterson, Ron Rivera. Like, those are good NFL coaches. 18 and 18 in the playoffs. That's a fantastic coaching record.
Yeah, and like
it's not Belichick's coaching record, but it's great.
Yeah, like people are going to look back and they're going to say Brad Childress with the Vikings. He went to the NFC Championship game. I mean, he had some success after they brought in Brett Favre at quarterback. I mean, he obviously didn't last, but I mean, so he's probably not like a great coach. Neither really is Leslie. But I mean, you can't ignore what Sean McDermott has done with the Bills, right?
John Harbaugh comes from this coaching tree. He's one of the best coaches in football, and
he started as a special teams coordinator. So he went from special teams coordinator to head coach. And I know a lot of people are like looking at the Joe Judge thing, and they're saying, okay, well, he was a special teams coordinator, and he was a special teams coordinator for a team that was very, very creative, and they were very good on special teams, and that is the case. So I guess my only devil's advocate move here, Joe, would be like, okay, it may be a little too early to like make fun of this hire. It is an odd hire, but who knows? Maybe he can be one of the outliers like John Harbaugh was. But I mean, there's no question about it. The Andy Reid coaching tree is is fantastic. We've seen the genius of Doug Peterson. We know that Ron Rivera is a great head coach. He was the best head coach available on the market, even over McCarthy, in my opinion. And then I think the jury's still out on Matt Nagy, but we've seen that Matt Nagy is, if nothing else, is a brilliant offensive mind. So obviously, this is a nice roster for his coaching tree.
Yeah, and like, I'm not saying that Joe Judge is 100% going to be a bust here. But the fact that Joe Judge got a job this year and all those coaches got jobs last year without Eric Bieniemy getting a coaching job is downright criminal.
Was just getting ready to say that. It's amazing that he has not been hired yet. And look, there's a reason somebody is going to. I don't think there's any terrible reason. Maybe he's just not a good interviewer. I mean,
I guarantee that's it. But you got to take a chance at some point with this coaching tree's history.
You would think so. But it's got to be. It's got to be the fact that he must just not be a good interview. Maybe he just doesn't present his offensive plans or his head coaching platform. I don't know what it is, but it's got to be the fact that he's just not good in interviews. And look, at any rate, some people are just not good in interviews. If you're
some
put
of
on the
my
spot,
worst hires at my job have been terrible interviews. Some of the best hires have been terrible interviews. You just never know.
You really don't. It's the resume that the coaches put. Eric Bieniemy has a fantastic resume that he can put head to head against pretty much anybody available, and I would hire him over Josh McDaniels. I'm not touching Josh McDaniels. There's no question about it. I don't want anything to do with Josh McDaniels. So if Josh McDaniels gets a head coaching job over Eric Bieniemy, I'm going to be just in a total loss.
All right, Chris, over to you. Who do you want to talk about on this list?
Obviously, I think Mike McCarthy. I mean, that's the elephant in the room, right? I mean, the what a lot of people consider to be the number one opening in the league. The only big elephant in the room there is that you got to deal with Jerry Jones. Do you really want to deal with Jerry Jones? Some people say yes, it's worth it. Some people say no. I'm one of the people that would pretty much say no at this point. But nonetheless, I think Mike McCarthy was an excellent hire. This is there's an adult in the room. I've talked about that many times, mainly when it comes to the Browns opening. Dallas, I don't think necessarily needed an adult in the room. I think their locker room is fine, but they did need a new direction. They needed a guy that the players week in and week out are going to listen to. They're going to buy into what Coach McCarthy is selling. I think that is going to be the case with Mike McCarthy. He has proved it before. He has won a Super Bowl. So that's obviously on his resume. That's a big thing. And apparently he spent the night at Jerry Jones' house. and I mean, they were just having a blast. So it seems like it's love at first sight now. I mean, what do you guys think that was like? Spending the night at Jerry Jones' house, got your PJs on, and is he taking a monorail over to the West Wing of over to Jerry Jones' house? Like, I mean, it's got to be pretty cool, I would imagine. But jokes aside, I think this is an excellent hire. I think this is good for Dak. I think it's good for Zeke. And it's good for Amari if they can find a way to re-sign him. I don't think, to be honest with you, that this team really skips much of a beat. I think they're just as good next year as they were this year. But there is a piece of this that we need to get to from the offensive standpoint, and that's Kellen Moore. Kellen Moore seems to be leaning towards staying in Dallas with Mike McCarthy. But the weird thing is, or the interesting thing is he going to let Kellen Moore call the plays? We've seen what Kellen Moore did in his first year as OC, and he was phenomenal. He's one of the best offensive coordinators in the entire league this year. But McCarthy has already been on record saying before he does not want to relinquish the play calling duties.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. Like, Kellen Moore, like, you kind of understated it. This was the 5th best offense in NFL history in terms of total yardage. So it wasn't just good, it was great. And I think that their total points scored was hamstrung a little bit by some insanely bad coaching decisions by Jason Garrett. Like, kicking field goals in the red zone up by 2 possessions when it doesn't put you up by 3 possessions with less than 4 yards to go. He did that multiple times this year, and it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and it's funny because we seem like a lot of these coaches getting hired now are more I don't want to say risk-oriented coaches, but they're willing to take more risk. They're a little bit more aggressive, and I like that. And especially in a data and analytics society that we live in now in the NFL, certainly more and more people are open to the fact of going for 2-point conversions more often than not, and going for it on fourth down in situations, that you wouldn't normally see in like yesteryear. So Jason Garrett's just not one of those guys. He's a good offensive coordinator. We've seen what he did under Wade Phillips, obviously ultimately getting the head coaching job in Dallas, but he got that for a reason. He's a good offensive mind, but he's not as aggressive as a lot of people would like. I think Kellen Moore is obviously much more aggressive, and he's much more willing to take downfield shots and take chances if given the opportunity to call the plays and make those offensive decisions. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. If I was like the Giants, though, if I'm Joe Judge, who we just mentioned, I'm doing everything I can to talk Kellen Moore into coming to New York. I know that I'm not the sexy hire if I'm Joe Judge. So I'm looking and I'm trying to fill my top 2 coordinator spots with sexy names, with names that I believe not only that are the sexy names and the headline grabbing names, but names that are also going to be able to get it done. We've seen Wade Phillips get it done. He'll turn it around in a year. He'll get that defense right back in the top 10 in the league very, very quickly. He's done it everywhere he's been, seemingly. So I would try my best to hire Wade Phillips as DC and then go get Kellen Moore's offense and say, look, you're absolutely going to call the plays here. The offense is yours. Daniel Jones is yours. Darius Slayton, Golden Tate, Sterling Shepard, they're all yours. And I don't really know why Kellen Moore would actually want to stay in Dallas over going to New York, to be honest with you, because we talked about it last week. I think the Giants is the most attractive job from top to bottom that was open, because I don't want to deal with Jerry Jones. I'm not somebody who could be micromanaged like that. So that's just coming from my standpoint. But it's the Mike McCarthy hire, getting back to that, I think it's excellent. I don't think really Dallas skips much of a beat. Obviously, if Kellen Moore moves on, that's something that they're going to have to. That's an obstacle they're going to have to overcome. So we'll see who they would hire there in that case. But it's a good hire it's a good safe hire too. I think is one thing a lot of people. It's a safe hire for the Cowboys, and they wanted somebody with coaching experience. It wasn't going to be Matt Rule. It wasn't going to be Lincoln Riley, or they weren't going to go to Washington and try to grab Chris Peterson. But and then one more thing on Kellen Moore. This Kellen Moore being that good, as you mentioned, Joe, it should not, make anyone surprised. He came from Chris Peterson. He's a Chris Peterson from the Chris Peterson coaching tree. Chris Peterson is unarguably one of the best coaches in college, as far as I'm concerned. And you just knew that he was going to learn a lot of stuff, especially as the quarterback for that Chris Peterson Boise State team years ago. So I just think anybody who gets Kellen Moore is very, very lucky to have that offensive mind on their staff. Even as young and inexperienced as he might be, he's still very, very effective.
Yeah, I mean, just back to Mike McCarthy for a second. He's 125, 77, and 2 as a head coach. He is a fantastic head coach. Like, I get he had Aaron Rodgers,
and Brett Favre.
I think he was instrumental in developing Aaron Rodgers. I think that a big part of why Aaron Rodgers became what Aaron Rodgers became was because of him. Because if you remember, like, we were talking about Alex Smith versus Aaron Rodgers in that draft, and Alex Smith won out. So there were question marks with Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, and it's funny because you look at Mike McCarthy, and a lot of people might look at like someone like Phil Jackson in the NBA. Like, okay, is Phil really that good, or is he just a product of having Michael Jordan on his team and having Kobe Bryant on his teams? Like, is he really that good of a coach? Because when he went to the Knicks, we saw, okay, it didn't really work out very well. So it's kind of the same thing with Mike McCarthy. We've never really seen Mike McCarthy as a head coach without Brett Favre, without Aaron Rodgers, and now without Dak Prescott, who I think has proved that he is more than just a mediocre quarterback in the league. He's a very good quarterback in this league. So that's great quarterback after at the very least rock solid quarterback. So, I mean, you got the most important position locked up at all 3 tenures of your head coaching resume. You can't really ask for much more than that, or much better than that if you're Mike McCarthy.
Yeah, we'll have to come back to this when we do our coaching episode after the draft, because there's a ton of data that we need to dive through here.
All right, guys, Matt Rule then, last name on the list. Any comments? Again, incoming college coach. This one might be one we want to revisit more in the later episodes, because they don't know what's going on at quarterback. New head coach, never been in the NFL. There's just so many question marks.
Well,
I don't have an opinion yet.
Well, there are some notes. I have some notes on Matt Rule. So the interesting thing with Matt Rule, and I think this is, people are always going to wonder, the biggest question is, how is this going to affect Christian McCaffrey? Inexperienced NFL head coach, what's going to happen with McCaffrey? Is he safe? Yes, Christian McCaffrey is way more than safe. And I would venture to bet that DJ Moore is going to be way more than safe. Like these two guys, you're going to want to buy hard in 2020 if you're not already. Look, Baylor ran out of the pistol formation a lot. And obviously that's not something that's used a ton in the NFL, but we saw the team with the number one offense in the league do it this year in the Baltimore Ravens. They ran out of the pistol a lot and they were very successful with it. This is where they have a lot of option runs where the running back is still able to hit the line at full speed. And it allows for like great play action play calling. So this is going to be interesting having a quarterback like Cam Newton if he stays in Carolina. We'll see what happens to that, but I think most of us believe he's going to stay. The other thing about Baylor's offense is that at least on tape in the passing game, they have used their running backs heavily in the passing game. And I'm not just talking about like bubble screens and like, just tossing the ball over to them in the flats. They make them a huge part of the offense by getting them squared up in mismatches underneath, forcing them to gain separation underneath as well. So this is the perfect hire for if you're a Christian McCaffrey. Like this is the perfect hire for Christian McCaffrey. And then, as far as like, some other nuances of the offense, they use a lot of motion. You're going to see the tight end coming across the field pre-snap. I don't know if that's going to be Ian Thomas. We don't know. He's not the most athletic guy in the world, so we'll see what happens with Ian Thomas in the tight end position in 2020. But you're going to see a lot of tight end movement. You're going to see a lot of jet motion as well. So this is something to really look at for in Matt Rule's offense. And I just think this is an excellent hire for Carolina. I really thought he was going to be the favorite for the Giants to be signed as head. And I was hoping that Daniel Jones was going to be able to get Matt Rule as head coach. But hey, I'll take it. If I'm a Christian McCaffrey owner, a DJ Moore owner, you can't really get much better than Matt Rule, to be honest with you. So I think this is a great hire for Carolina.
All right, some minor notes here, some offensive coordinator things, because they do matter for fantasy. The Redskins have hired Scott Turner, the son of Norv Turner, as their offensive coordinator, and the Panthers have hired Sean Ryan, the Lions quarterback coach, as their offensive coordinator. I kind of want to go to the Redskins. Scott Turner was the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach of the Panthers last year. He made us believe Kyle Allen was a real thing for a few weeks. I'm going to be honest, that gives me some hope. Huge. And of course, what you said, DJ Moore, Christian McCaffrey, he can run a good offense. There's talent on the Redskins offense. So I'm excited about this.
Are we buyers on Darius Geis again?
No.
He's going to be free.
I mean, if he's free, maybe. It really depends on where he's drafted. If there's any type of hype, then no. But he just keeps getting hurt.
He keeps getting hurt, but if he has a full season, like Leonard Fournette kept getting hurt, and all of a sudden he had pretty much a full season this year and crushed it. I think for the right price, you've got to buy on these kind of players.
It just depends on what is the right price.
Yeah.
All right, guys, that is it for our news, for our coaching carousel. Let's dive into the meat of the show, and we're going to start out with some running backs. So for this format, I have the good, the shockingly good, the players that were what we expected, the bad, and the other players, the guys whose value is not really seen in their Final Fantasy rankings. You guys ready to dive into this?
Let's do it.
All right, we're going to start out with the good, the top three in fantasy PPR scoring: Christian McCaffrey, Aaron Jones, and Ezekiel Elliott. Obviously the good. Are there any shocks on this list? I think Aaron Jones, I guess, because we didn't really expect him to be top three good, but we always saw him as a top 10 running back.
I think Aaron Jones, I didn't see him finishing as high as he did, but the inconsistency that we saw out of him was something that I expected. I guess maybe we didn't expect 50-point ceiling games out of him like we saw against the Cowboys, but like Jamal Williams played 35% of the Packers' offensive snaps in 12 out of their 16 games, and Aaron Jones averaged 16.96 PPR points in those 12 games. Like, that's what I expected out of him. It was the 27 plus points per game that we saw in the other games that was the surprise.
Yeah, Aaron Jones, he averaged, from a points per game standpoint, he averaged the third most fantasy points per game of any running back all season long. And that was at 19.7 per game. And I think, to me, it's the sheer amount of touchdowns that really saved him. Like Christian McCaffrey could have had, he had 15 rushing touchdowns and four. He could have had like 5 rushing touchdowns and still have been probably a top 5 running back, top 6 running back. But Aaron Jones, I think his touchdowns really saved him this year because he just broke over 1,000 yards. But he had the 16 rushing touchdowns, the 3 receiving touchdowns, and the only running back to finish in the top 6, or excuse me, in the top 7, I believe, with less receptions than he did was Derrick Henry at only 18 receptions on the year. Aaron Jones had 49. So it's not bad, but obviously it's not like, what we would expect out of someone like Alvin Kamara, obviously Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler, guys like that finished in the top 8 at running back. So there was a bit of inconsistency, and that's what really caused, Mark and I on the show a couple months ago to say, look, before the playoffs, you want to sell Aaron Jones. Like, sell Aaron Jones for Leonard Fournette. Sell him for Chris Carson. Obviously, Carson ended up getting hurt, so that's really not a fair thing to kind of compare it to there. But sell him for an all around consistent workhorse. And ironically enough, Leonard Fournette was a guy that wasn't scoring touchdowns. He was doing it. He was just doing it in every other way. And he finishes RB9 respectively. But yeah, obviously that sort of, idea of selling Aaron Jones for the playoffs worked out for the first 2 weeks after saying that. And then obviously from that point on, Aaron Jones, in some cases even won people some leagues. So he was solid. I had him, I think, as like RB11, RB12 before the season, I believe. So I certainly thought he was going to be in that RB1 conversation, but I didn't think he was going to be in the RB1 conversation, which he was for a lot of the year. Obviously, McCaffrey was, sort of pacing him by a pretty big margin, but he was up there, with Dalvin Cook and Derrick Henry, and Ezekiel Elliott, obviously. But I don't know for 2020. I guess I'm just not like doing cartwheels and backflips over Aaron Jones. There's just a lot where he's going to go in 2020. There's still a lot more guys. Like I would rather go with Dalvin Cook. I'd rather go with Zeke. I think I would rather go with Fournette, Nick Chubb, Alvin Kamara, Saquon Barkley, Joe Mixon. I think I would rather go with guys like that in PPR 2020, to be honest with you. But hey, hats off to Aaron Jones. He had a great season, and finally it seemed like, for the most part, Jamal Williams was kind of out of the way and not too much of a factor.
So you want to hear something crazy about Christian McCaffrey's 2019 season? If you take out all of his rushing stats, 100% of them, he scored 240.5 points as a receiver. That would have been good enough for the RB 12 and also the wide receiver 12, just with the receiving stats.
It's wild, man. What a season. One of the best running back seasons in PPR of all time. It was, and look, this is a guy that was, for the most part, a lot of people had him as, the second, third pick in the draft. And look, rightfully so. So it should come.
I still think Saquon Barkley might be just as good or better of a pick next year at 101.
100%. I'm probably going to take Saquon Barkley at 1.1, to be honest with you. But there will be leagues, obviously, where I take Christian McCaffrey, because again, with this Matt Rule hire, I don't think the pace for Christian McCaffrey, really slows down. Now, he's obviously going to have a little bit of regression. He's not doing that again. And it's unlikely he finishes as the RB1. We just don't see that very often where running backs repeat like that. So we'll see what happens there. But he's going to probably finish the year as a top 4 running back. So taking him at 1.1, you really can't argue against it, especially after the year he just had and the offense that he's about to be put into. So look, I still think Saquon Barkley is the most overall talented running back in the NFL. And I think for my money, I think I'm going to probably take him in most of my leagues if I have the 1.1 pick. But it's certainly close, and I'm certainly not going to crucify anybody for taking McCaffrey.
The one thing that gives me a little pause about McCaffrey is that 400 touches in a season is the number that marks regression in the following season for running backs. McCaffrey had 403. So he's right on that line. I think that there's a world where he can beat the trend, but you've got to be a little bit cautious about it.
Yeah, and if we're talking regression, we're not talking regression outside the top 10. He's going to be a top...
Unless he has an injury, obviously.
Yeah, you're right. And he just doesn't have that. I mean,
far.
Yeah, so far he just doesn't have that. Now it's eventually going to catch up with him. He plays running back, and he's a workhorse. It happens. But hopefully it's no time soon. But yeah, I mean, he's just an historic season. So yeah, unlike Aaron Jones, I'm completely buying Christian McCaffrey, and I'm probably buying him more this coming year than I was last year as a top 3 running back. Just because, again, I think the Matt Rule offense is a huge deal that a lot of people are not looking into. But if they actually dissect Baylor's offense, they will see that this is a great thing for Christian McCaffrey.
one more thing before we jump into the next little tier of players. Ezekiel Elliott is a hard buy for me because I'm looking all over the fantasy community
100%.
and I'm seeing people that are panicking because Mike McCarthy hasn't had a great history with running backs. Like, he was fine with Eddie Lacy, and Eddie Lacy was never half the running back that Ezekiel Elliott is.
Panic some more. Panic some more.
He didn't identify Aaron Jones, and that's a problem. But you don't need to identify Ezekiel Elliott. You're giving Ezekiel Elliott a 90% snap share and an 80+% workload day one, no matter what.
Yeah, and I don't think not identifying Aaron Jones, like, I don't necessarily think that's on McCarthy. I think, when he
got hurt. He got hurt both times.
Yeah, and not only that, but he was a fifth, sixth round pick. So it's one of those things where he was one of your late picks anyway. You used more draft capital on Jamal Williams, and typically, like, coming out, Jamal Williams was the better prospect. There's no question about he was the better running back prospect. He was better. He was a better all-around running back. And Mark and I talked about that all the time. That's one of the reasons why we like Jamal Williams. And we've seen Jamal Williams be a quality running back. He can be that when he's healthy. He really kind of shown some good stuff this year. But he was a better overall prospect at the running back position, mainly because of pass pro and blitz pickup. And so that was the big thing for me with Jamal Williams coming out. But Aaron Jones obviously picked all of that up and has become a much better all-around running back than Jamal Williams, and that's fine. But I think had Mike McCarthy been the coach this year, I don't think Aaron Jones would be too far off of where he finished.
For the record, the fantasy takeaway was hashtag Team Jones, while the RotoBros were hashtag Team Williams.
For the record, the RotoBros didn't exist back in that first year.
You guys actually both came out and said that you were Team Jamal Williams, though.
Oh, we were totally Jamal Williams. And like I said, coming out, he was a better overall prospect, but that doesn't always mean much. Just because you're drafted ahead of somebody, you're drafted ahead of them usually for a reason, but that doesn't mean that those reasons are going to stick. Aaron Jones obviously fits the offense, I think, a little bit better. But they're both good, I think, decent running backs. But obviously Aaron Jones is more than a decent running back, but they're both really good running backs, I think. And Aaron Jones just so happened to grow a little bit more, grow faster. And he's a better fit for this particular offense as a whole, in my opinion.
All right, guys, let's move into the more fun category, the shockingly good, the guys that just shocked the hell out of us in 2019. Derrick Henry, RB5. There's a lot of skepticism about him to start the season. Austin Eckler, RB4, my man. Kenyon Drake, RB17. My note here, despite being in Miami for half the season. Miles Sanders, RB15, and Dalvin Cook, RB6. I'm going to resist my homerism. I want to start with Austin Eckler. That kid is good at football.
Austin Eckler, I think when everybody started, nobody was thinking about Austin Eckler until the Melvin Gordon, contract situation really kind of, got off the ground and it started becoming a big issue. And, over the summer, I was thinking, there's no way Melvin Gordon's not going to sit out. Surely him and his agent are not stupid enough to think that when they don't have any, hardly any leverage, that this is going to be a worthwhile tactic for them. And it ended up not being a worthwhile tactic because we saw that this offense did not skip a beat and was arguably better with Austin Eckler as the workhorse. Eckler, finished as RB4 overall. He had 557 rushing yards, only 3 rushing touchdowns, but he had almost 1,000 receiving yards and 8 receiving touchdowns, 108 targets, 92 receptions. The guy was unbelievable. And we knew the closer we started getting to season's kickoff, we knew, okay, we need to start paying attention to Austin Eckler. This is a guy that that can absolutely get it done in this offense, and we've seen other teams or other players in this offense get it done before. We've seen it happen, with guys like Darren Sproles. We've seen it happen with guys like Danny Woodhead. They've been effective in that sort of role, and Austin Eckler is just a better all-around running back than those guys, and he really, really made it work. And for not having as much rushing production as Melvin Gordon, would typically have as a runner, he's certainly made up for it as a receiver. And I think, to be honest with you, I think they were better when Austin Eckler was the workhorse himself. So it goes back to the old saying. And obviously, Mark and I are Gold Club members of the running backs don't matter crowd, right? So this is something. It's like the epitome example here of running backs don't matter. Yes, Melvin Gordon was looked at as one of the elite 7 or 8 running backs in the league. and you subtract him immediately. The offense is supposed to sputter when you take a guy like that out. Not in today's NFL where running backs don't matter. You just insert a guy that has a lot of great talent, and not even a guy that has a lot of great talent. Like, you could really insert virtually anybody in there that can somewhat play football, and you have a decent running back, a decent running game in today's NFL. Austin Eckler certainly proved that. You don't need a running back. You don't need to pay a running back $20, $40, $60 million to get the job done for you. Austin Eckler's clearly an example of that. So, when everybody started noticing that, okay, Melvin Gordon's probably going to start missing some games, Austin Eckler's price just skyrocketed. And for good reason. And we knew he was going to be an RB1 in PPR. We knew it. We didn't know RB4, however. RB4 was a little higher than what we all believed.
He was the RB1 overall, too, before Melvin Gordon came back, and he didn't fall off that much. Like, he was the running back 5 from the game Melvin Gordon came back until week 17. That's insane. I never thought that the production wouldn't fall off, and it did for a few games, but he had some of those monster weeks at the end of the season that really, like, I was an Austin Eckler owner in the same league that I had Christian McCaffrey, and I skated to a championship. It was so easy.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's kind of a twofold with Austin Eckler. There's two stories there. Number one story was, okay, Melvin Gordon is not that important, clearly, okay? And number two, the production from Big Mike Williams from BMW, we knew that was going to go down. You're inserting a guy that's going to catch a lot more passes and get targeted a lot more in a lot more different situations than Melvin Gordon is. So clearly that's going to take receptions and targets from somebody in that offense. And in the red zone, you're not going to take away those looks from Hunter Henry when he's on the field. Obviously, he got hurt at some point. But Keenan Allen, you're certainly not taking away his looks at receiver. So who's left to suffer? It was going to be Big Mike Williams all along. So Austin Eckler really showed us that, okay, Big Mike Williams, his fantasy value is going to suffer because of this. And number two, Melvin Gordon, I'm going to show you that Melvin Gordon is not that important. And I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know if Melvin Gordon's going to play in LAC this year. None of us do. Probably not. Because they're probably not going to be willing to match his contract demands. Some team might, like Tampa or some team like that. But I think that's obviously a huge mistake. And it goes back into the running backs don't matter discussion, and that's a different discussion for a different day. But Eckler, was amazing. He was absolutely incredible. However, in 2020, this is a wait and see on the backfield because we don't know what they're going to do in the draft. We don't know what they're going to do in free agency. I would imagine his role for the most part is safe, and he'll still be a safe pick in PPR. But people may want to look at more of like a high-end RB2, low-end RB1 for Austin Eckler. Don't expect RB1 to RB5 production in 2020. I just would not expect that. And I would not be going into 2020 like drafting, my redraft teams, on that basis.
All right, so Kenyon Drake, guys. Kenyon Drake. He's a starter next year somewhere, right?
I think he's going to be a starter in Arizona.
Yes. That's my hope. But I mean, again, you got David Johnson. Who knows if they trade him for value? Crazier things have happened. But yes, he has earned a starting role somewhere, finally.
Yeah, there weren't many guys, and you guys know this. There were not many guys in the preseason that I had a bigger fantasy man crush on than Kenyon Drake. He was, prior to this season, I haven't double checked these stats after 2019. But going into 2019, he was up there in efficiency per touch with Saquon Barkley, and arguably more efficient in some aspects. If you judge by the team that he played for, he was always a guy that has an immense amount of talent, is an immensely effective running back per touch, and playing on a bad offense like that, you just knew that if they were just to give him the workload, it will work. And we thought, okay, Brian Flores is here. He's in town now. Kalen Ballage sucks. And finally, we all know that now. We can stop with that circus show that we had in the preseason. But we knew that Kenyon Drake had all this talent in the world, and certainly you did, being an Alabama fan, Murph. I think he's incredible. I think he's phenomenal. I think he is one of the best. I'm not gonna lie. I think he's one of the best overall running backs in the NFL. I do, from a talent standpoint, and I think all he needs is a workload like we see from those more elite running backs. A lot of these elite fantasy running backs are elite, not just because of their talent, but because of the work and the volume that they get. And I think Kenyon Drake is a guy like is that same type of guy. You give him that sort of workload, he's a surefire top 10 running back and RB1 in fantasy. And personally, I think David Johnson's days in Arizona are over. They are going to have to eat some of that contract in order to get rid of him, in order to trade him. You cannot have all this money tied up in the backfield. Kenyon Drake is younger. Kenyon Drake is, at this point, I believe, is better. And I know David Johnson wasn't horrible before his injury, before they traded for Kenyon Drake, but he was not effective. He just can't seem to stay healthy. He's getting up there in age now. I think he's going to be 29 next year. That's starting to hit the worry meter a little bit for running backs. So this to me is just like sell David Johnson. Fantasy, reality, sell David Johnson, move on with Kenyon Drake. I think this is an excellent offense for Kenyon Drake too. Are you kidding me? Cliff Kingsbury's offense with Kenyon Drake? Please, I'm all over it. So we're talking about buy and sells later on. Kenyon Drake is a hard buy for me in 2020.
Dude, he played his first game for the Cardinals in week 9 against the 49ers. From that point on, he scored 159.4 PPR points. Only Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, and Ezekiel Elliott scored more. He was the RB4 from the time he stepped foot on the field for the Arizona Cardinals until the end of the season.
Yeah, I mean, he's just that good. It shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. And I get it. Look, he had those 2 games back-to-back against Cleveland and Seattle, but that's where he got the workload. Look what happens when you give him a normal workhorse running back workload, right? Like the Zekes, the Fournettes, the Chubbs, and all that. He got 22 carries against Cleveland, 24 against Seattle, 137 rushing yards against Cleveland, 166 rushing yards against Seattle. He had 6 touchdowns combined. Now, he wasn't very effective in the receiving game because he was obviously doing more on the ground. But the guy can do it all. And again, he is very efficient per touch. And in an offense like that, with an offensive mind like Cliff Kingsbury, who actually did a much better job than I think what a lot of people expected him to this year. This is just something to me that I think is just awesome. I'm going to be just as high on him, probably higher in 2020 than I was in 2019. And you mentioned the week 9 when he got traded, he played San Francisco, 15 touches, 110 yards, scored a touchdown. And he had 4 catches, 4 targets, 52 yards in the receiving game. So against a great defense like that. So Kenyon Drake is a guy that people need to be looking at in 2020 again. And I think his stock is going to skyrocket. I think he's going to be drafted as more of like an RB2, obviously. But I'm telling you,
I'll draft him as an RB1, though. I will take him in the second round, no problem.
I won't have any problem with that. Of course, it depends on who's there. But yeah,
sure. If David Johnson's still there, it might give me a little bit of pause, but it's going to give the fantasy community more pause than it will me. So I'm still going to own a ton.
Okay. David Johnson goes to Tampa. Kenyon Drake goes, stays in Arizona. Okay. They don't really add many, big pieces in the offseason. Are you drafting Kenyon Drake over David Johnson? Because I sure as hell am.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of a duh moment.
I'm absolutely drafting Kenyon Drake over David Johnson. And the biggest thing is the injuries for David Johnson. He's been so bad with injuries since he had that wrist situation. I'm just not prepared to trust him. But, if David Johnson ends up being like a 5th or 6th round pick, I'm into it.
All right. So finally, before we move on, Miles Sanders, RB15. Are you guys going to buy the hype on him next year, or is he kind of going to be too pricey in your opinion?
It kind of depends on where the fantasy community lands on him, because if they land on he gets a full workload as a workhorse running back, I'm probably not going to be a buyer at that point. But if they're looking at him as a low-end RB2 or a low-end RB1, high-end RB2, I'll probably be a buyer at that point, because with the efficiency that he showed and with the pass catching prowess that he showed, he has the upside to be a solid RB1, even if he's only getting 50 to 60% of the workload. Doug Peterson does that all the time. Like, look at Jay Ajayi in that system. He's half the running back Miles Sanders is.
Yeah, this is a guy that was my number 2 running back initially coming out. I had him ranked over Josh Jacobs. That's how much I loved Miles Sanders on tape. He was phenomenal for Penn State. And obviously he was phenomenal this year for the Eagles. So I think a lot of it is also going to be tied to Jordan Howard. Like, what are they going to do with Jordan Howard? Are they going to get rid of him? Are they going to give the full reins to Miles Sanders? Like, what do they think is going to happen? I'm going to be honest with you. I think they are going to do one of two things, but in the same realm of the same, decision. They are going to want to have some quality stack at running back. They're not going to want to have. I don't think they're going to go into the season, the 2020 season, with Boston Scott as the top back. I just don't. I don't think they'd feel comfortable with that. You saw the injuries that this team had as a whole this year. Even Miles Sanders dealt with some nagging injuries at some points on this year as well. But obviously at receiver and tight end, they had a lot of injuries. So this is a team that I think they're going to look at that and they're going to be like, look, we need to have more quality across the board. They might look to bring back Jordan Howard. And if they don't, I do think they look to find like another quality running back that they could bring in to this offense. And, we just mentioned a guy, maybe David Johnson. I don't know. Maybe Arizona sells him at a nice price point. It's not likely because they'll have to already eat the contract and then sell him at a little bit of a cheaper point, but they're not going to have much leverage anyway. So maybe Howie Roseman, we've seen him, pull the sheet off the table from a lot of teams before, and he could possibly do it again there. I think that it's a possible landing spot if Jordan Howard ends up leaving and going elsewhere. But, if Miles Sanders becomes the workhorse, I think the end of the season that he had, it's going to be a lot of recency bias. It's going to stick in a lot of people's minds. They're going to remember that, and they're going to say, I think this guy is probably going to be an RB10 if he gets a lot of that workload in a Doug Peterson offense with these healthy weapons around. I'll be honest with you. I don't foresee Joe being a big buyer because I do foresee them, having, probably giving him the workload. So I don't know if they're going to add somebody or they're going to keep, Jordan Howard there. But if they do, or if they don't, he's going to be thrust in that back end RB1 conversation. And at that point, there might be some guys available that you might rather have. Like, I think Miles Sanders is going to get drafted ahead of Kenyon Drake. I believe that. Kenyon Drake. And I would take Kenyon Drake over Miles Sanders at this point tonight. January 7th, I will take Kenyon Drake in 2020 over Miles Sanders. We'll see if that changes in August, September. But yeah, I mean, that's just kind of where it's at. I think right now where Miles Sanders would land if drafts were tomorrow, I think there's going to be a lot of guys that would probably rather opt to have over Miles Sanders.
We got to keep in mind, too, quickly before we move on, 78.3% of the running back snaps and 73.77% of the running back one touches. Like, that's it. That's all we can get in a Doug Peterson offense. That's the most we've ever seen, and that was Jamal Charles. So I think it's safe to look at around 70% as the touch market share ceiling for Miles Sanders.
All right, let's move on to guys that were what we expected. I got 3 names listed here. Nick Chubb at RB9, Leonard Fournette at RB7, and Josh Jacobs at RB21, that RB2 range for a rookie. I have Leonard Fournette on here, and I kind of want to put the asterisk. We expected this if he was healthy. I didn't expect this, but I put him in here anyway.
He had a weird season, too. Like, that many fantasy points without hardly scoring any touchdowns was shocking to me.
Yeah, I was on the show with Joe Pisapia, and he and I were talking. He hated Leonard Fournette, and he and I went back and forth about Leonard Fournette. We debated. Leonard Fournette was my RB7 on the year, so he obviously finishes RB7. He was a guy that I loved. I was buying all in where he was being drafted because I figured, look, they've got Nick Foles as the starting quarterback. This isn't going to be a pass happy offense. They are going to run Leonard Fournette into the ground. I was never worried about Raquel Armstead. I was never a fan of his coming out of college. So I looked at the receiving weapons, and I'm like, I don't see it for Leonard Fournette. I mean, I don't see it being an offense that is not Leonard Fournette friendly. It is going to run through him, and if he stays healthy, he is absolutely going to be a top 7-8 running back, and he was. Nick Chubb, I think, is pretty much what a lot of people expected as well. It's funny. A lot of people were worrying about Kareem Hunt. They were like, I'm going to sell Kareem Hunt prior to week 10 or I'm going to sell Nick Chubb prior to week 10 before Kareem Hunt comes back. The receiving, and a lot of people thought, okay, well, Nick's going to be safe with his rushing, and he was. But a lot of people said, well, when Kareem Hunt gets back, he's really going to cut in to Nick Chubb's receiving. on the season as a total, they were like 50-50 when it comes to workload. So he did cut in toward the end of the year, but like they were 50-50 when it came to like, receiving. You had 49 targets for Nick Chubb on 36 catches. You had 44 targets for Kareem Hunt on 37 catches. So I think from like from a standpoint of when Kareem Hunt got back, obviously Kareem was the primary target in the receiving game. But Nick Chubb was so good that it didn't really affect him that much from a fantasy standpoint, like a lot of people assumed it would. Like a lot of people thought, I got him as a mid RB1 this year. I'll drop him down, to mid to high RB2. He was RB9, so he remained an RB1 all season long. I like him even more with Kareem Hunt likely gone in 2020.
Nick Chubb was like a mid-tier RB2 from the time that Kareem Hunt stepped on the field until the end of the season, though. He took a hit, and most of that hit was in the passing game because he still had some spike games in the running game, and he got 144 attempts, which is plenty. It was just that he only had 17 targets from the time Kareem Hunt stepped on the field for the rest of the season.
All right, let's move into the bad. Saquon Barkley, RB10, Le'Veon Bell, RB16, Todd Gurley, RB14. I got the pairing Carlos Hyde, Duke Johnson. Everybody was pretty hyped about the Houston Texans running back room, but running back 29 and 30 respectively. And Melvin Gordon and David Johnson, running back 23 and 37. We've already talked about them. I want to focus more on the big three. Saquon Barkley, that was a lot of injuries. Le'Veon Bell, that was Adam Gase. And Todd Gurley, I'm just scratching my head because it felt like they started to use him more towards the end of the year. But if he had that workload all along, he would have been maybe a top 5, top 6 running back. It's insane to me.
Yeah, it was obviously workload management. Like they were worried about him breaking down at the end of the season. And I think it lost them some games. I think that not having the offense run through Todd Gurley really hurt Jared Goff because he's not a good quarterback when it comes to reading defenses. Like he's got an okay arm. He can make a lot of the throws. He can't make all of the throws. But without Todd Gurley really bringing people up into the box on every single play, it just wasn't there for that team. And that offense struggled badly.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are going to be selling Todd Gurley very hard. I mean, if they even could. I think at this point, Todd Gurley's, his days of being, going for 26 carries and 134 yards and 2 scores are over. I think you're seeing more. I think you're going to start seeing more of like, 14 to 17 carries, 42 yards and 2 touchdowns. Like I think that's pretty much what Todd Gurley is going to be moving forward. It's unfortunate because of how good he was coming out of college, how good of a running back prospect he was coming out of college, and how quickly he tore it up coming out of college. So I think Todd Gurley is a guy that's more of an RB2. I'm not taking him I don't want him as my RB1 because I just don't think you're going to have that consistency. Le'Veon Bell, yeah, that's a lot of that has to do with Adam Gase. He's not going to be a Jet next year. We'll see where he goes. So that'll be interesting. I think he probably has 1 or 2 good, rock solid, elite years left in him, if possible. But obviously he has to go to the right place. Saquon Barkley, we just discussed it earlier with the Christian McCaffrey talk.
Buy.
Yeah, it's 100%. It's a buy. I'm taking him as a top 3 running back in every single draft that I'm in. If I have a top 3 pick and Saquon's there, I'm taking Saquon Barkley. And look, I think this Giants offense, you guys know for the last year and a half, I have been in love with the things that the Giants have done on offense and the moves that they have made, both additions and subtractions. And I think it's only going to get better for them in 2020. At least I would hope. We'll see with the new coach and new offense and all that kind of, how that pans out. But, another year for Daniel Jones, I think that's going to help. Hopefully a healthy year for Saquon Barkley, the offensive line continuing to get better. Hopefully Evan Ingram can stay on the field in 2020. And I think that offense will really hum. So I'm buying huge on Saquon Barkley. Not really. I'm kind of on the fence with Le'Veon right now. I was huge on him this year because I thought the volume was going to be there. It was not. And so with Todd Gurley, I'm just pretty much staying away from Todd Gurley altogether.
I wouldn't sell him, though. I think that you can, unless you're going to sell him on name value and somebody's going to buy, you pretty much have to hold him because he's still going to be an RB2. He's still going to be a useful player in Dynasty. You just don't want to have him as your workhorse RB1.
Exactly.
And finally, guys, the players that have values that are not seen in their final rankings. Devin Singletary at running back 32 and Adrian Peterson at running back 33. Mainly, this is a shout out to Adrian Peterson for being pretty solid in his old age, but I want to focus more on Devin Singletary. The hype will be unreal next year. The kid looked really good towards the end of the season, and I feel like he's going to be really hyped up. Are you guys going to be buyers?
I'm going to be a hard buyer. I love Devin Singletary. I've gone on record to say I would not be surprised if he is the top 12 running back, if he's an RB1 in 2020 in this offense. Hopefully Frank Gore will, either take a huge backseat or not be in the backfield at all anymore. This is a guy, we talk about efficiency. You guys know I love the efficiency. I love the Saquon Barkley efficiency. I love it with Kenyon Drake. Devin Singletary is that type of player. He is so efficient per touch, even in his rookie season. One of the big things, or the big question marks coming into his rookie season was, can he be an effective between the tackles runner? He showed that he can be. I'm huge on him. I think he's going to be just fine. This is a guy that I'm really, really high on in 20. Now, I'm not saying he is going to be an RB1. What I am saying is don't be surprised if he is. I would probably buy him at this moment in time. I would probably buy him as a high-end RB2 next season in Buffalo with low-end RB1. I think mid RB1 upside, but I think he's going to wind up being in that range week in and week out, is that high-end RB2, low-end RB1.
Yeah, and that offensive line is going to stay relatively intact, and it was one of the elite run-blocking offensive lines. So they've got a club option on their center. Like, they're going to be fine up front, and I think that team can get better on the ground if they give Devin Singletary a workload starting day one and he can stay healthy. Not
only that, but this has got to be a team that it needs to be in the market for an alpha number one wide receiver. John Brown's not it. John Brown's a quality guy, but he is more of a Robin wide receiver. He's not a Batman wide receiver. For a guy like Josh Allen, you need that is not always he makes some incredible throws, but for every great throw there's a head scratcher, and he's not gonna be very accurate all the time. He's not gonna be very consistent of a thrower all the time. He's never gonna be Peyton Manning. He's never gonna be John Elway. It's just not him. He's got a lot of great arm talent. He's just not going to be all that accurate. So you need a guy, in my opinion, like a Julio. Well, I don't want to say Julio because Julios don't grow on trees, but a guy like that with a huge catch, a big, fast, strong wide receiver that's great on all areas of the field and all levels of the field, even in the red zone, that has a huge catch radius. You got Dawson Knox at tight end, who has a huge catch radius. We saw how he was my number 2 tight end in the draft. We saw how good he was. You've got Cole Beasley, who I think has been an absolute gift from God for this Buffalo team, because when Josh is under duress, he tends to panic a little bit, and when he needs a dump off and a safety blanket, that is Cole Beasley. He's been excellent. John Brown, obviously that deep threat for them, when he wants to take a shot downfield. But I think...
Hey, you put some spec on that name. Come on.
Hey, no, look, I love John Brown.
He wasn't just a deep threat, though. You're not watching the film if you're calling him that, because he was running a ton of intermediate routes. He's running comebacks. He's running short crossers across the middle. He wasn't just that 9 route guy. He's not DK Metcalf.
No, but he is... You put some respect on that name. John, look, I like John Brown. I love the guy, but I think he is best suited for that role. I think they need to use John Brown in that sort of role to take the top off the defense, while you have a big all around alpha wide receiver 1 doing all the dirty work. That's what I think. And look, it's fine if you want to have John Brown do the dirty work. I just think that you would be a much more effective offense. And where am I going with this? We went to Devin Singletary. We went from Devin Singletary to the receiving game and Josh Allen's weapons, because I think with a weapon like that will open up the running game that much more for Devin Singletary. And I think that will make the defense respect the passing game that much more. And obviously that is going to spread that defense out, the opposing defense out, and that's going to allow more running room for Devin Singletary to do his thing and be even more efficient per touch than what he already is. So I think the Bills have a huge area to go up in the offensive production category going into 2020. Devin Singletary is a huge part of that. If they can find a way to, we talked about a guy like Jerry Jeudy, that's probably not going to be realistic now with the year that they had. But a guy like that, and this is a very high quality wide receiver draft, I think that that the Bills could do some really, really good things on offense again, and I think it would be even better for Devin Singletary.
All right, guys, we've gone a little long on this one, so we're going to do a second episode tomorrow for wide receivers. Y'all like that?
Yeah, let's do it.
I'm fine with it. We got a lot to dive into.
All right, we'll see you guys tomorrow for Chris at Mind of McConnell on Twitter, for Joe at Human Stat Sheet, for our friend Jeff, who will be back next week at NFL_DiMatteo, and of course myself at MurphyFT. We'll see y'all tomorrow. Bye, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Takeaway Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And follow the show on Twitter at FF Takeaway.